Ever feel like those real estate dreams are just out of reach? Like traditional financing is a giant roadblock.
Yeah, it can definitely feel that way sometimes.
Well, what if there was a way around it?
Hmm.
Like a secret path? Today, we're diving into a strategy that kind of flips the script on those conventional loans. It's called a wraparound mortgage.
Oh, wraparounds. Those are fascinating.
Hmm.
See, the seller becomes like a major player in the financing.
Oh, interesting.
It's like, imagine those Russian nesting dolls.
Okay.
The outer doll, that's your new mortgage.
Okay.
And inside, nestled away, is the seller's original mortgage. That's the wraparound.
So it's a mortgage within a mortgage.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mortgage within a mortgage.
All right. So how does this nesting doll thing actually work? What are the different ways it can play out?
Well, you've got a few variations.
Okay.
We'll start simple with the mirror wrap. Pretty straightforward, actually. The new mortgage basically mirrors the old one.
Oh, so like same interest rate, same payments.
Yep, exactly. A
Yep.
one-to-one transfer of the mortgage.
So the buyer steps right into the seller's shoes, just takes over.
Precisely. But now, let's spice things up a bit. We've got the equity wrap.
Okay, equity wrap. All right.
So think about a seller who's built up some equity, right? Maybe their mortgage is $200,000, but the property's worth $250,000.
Right. They've got that extra 50 grand.
Exactly. With an equity wrap, they might sell for, let's say, $235,000.
Okay.
They wrap their mortgage, pocket that extra $35,000 in equity.
Oh, so they get to cash out some of that equity while still making the sale.
You got it.
Smart. Right. Very smart. And then what about, I think you mentioned a rate wrap. That sounds kind of interesting.
Now we're getting to the heart of it.
Okay.
Imagine the seller's got a killer interest rate, maybe 3%.
Wow.
A steal, right?
Yeah.
With a rate wrap, the buyer agrees to a higher rate, let's say 6%. And that difference, pure profit for the seller.
It's like they turn their old mortgage into a little moneymaker. I can see the appeal for sellers.
Definitely. And savvy investors, they get creative, you know? They might buy with a mirror wrap to keep things simple. Then later, when they sell, boom, a mix of equity and rate wraps. That's where the returns get amplified.
Oh, so you can combine these strategies.
Exactly. But, and this is key, it's a two-way street. Got to look at both sides.
Right, of course, of course. So let's talk about the buyers. What are their advantages with wraparound mortgages?
Well, the biggest one, accessibility. Think about buyers who might not qualify for those typical bank loans.
Yeah, maybe their credit score isn't great or their income is a bit inconsistent.
Exactly. A wraparound can be a real game changer for them.
It's like a side door to homeownership.
You got it.
What about down payments? Are those usually smaller with a wraparound?
Often, yeah. The seller's acting as the lender, so there's more flexibility. Great for first-time buyers or anyone with limited funds.
It lowers the barrier to entry, basically.
Exactly.
Now, what about interest rates? Are those generally better or?
That's where it gets tricky. If the seller has a super low rate on their original mortgage, the buyer might get lucky. But you have to compare, you know?
So there's no guarantee it'll be better.
Right. And of course, there are downsides.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, one is that interest rate, it could actually be higher than a conventional loan.
So buyers got to crunch the numbers,
Yeah.
make sure the total cost makes sense.
Exactly. But maybe even more crucial, the buyer is relying on the seller. Remember that inner doll, that original mortgage.
Right, right.
If the seller misses payments to the bank, the buyer's in trouble.
That's a little scary to think about. It's a shared risk.
Definitely. That's why you need rock-solid contracts and do your due diligence.
I-
Always.
Absolutely. So lots to consider for the buyer. Now let's flip it. What about the seller's perspective? What are their advantages?
Well, one of the biggest is extra income. Remember how we talked about that interest rate difference?
Yeah.
That becomes cash flow for the seller every month. They're earning interest like a bank.
Their mortgage turns into this little income machine.
Exactly. And because wraparound mortgages can offer more flexible terms for buyers, it makes the property more attractive,
Oh, so it might even help them sell faster.
especially in a competitive market. And this income stream, it can last for years.
That's pretty tempting. But I'm guessing there are risks for the seller, too. It can't all be good.
Right. You always have to look at both sides. One concern is that due on sale clause that many mortgages have.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly is a due on sale clause?
It basically means if the property's sold, the bank, the one holding that original mortgage, they can demand full payment right then.
Whoa. So the whole wraparound deal could fall apart because of that.
It's a risk. That's why you absolutely need a real estate attorney involved. They can navigate that stuff.
So sellers, don't try this at home, kids. You need expert help.
Exactly. Another risk. what if the buyer defaults on the wraparound?
Oh, right. Even though the seller isn't the main lender anymore.
They're still responsible if the buyer doesn't pay.
Another shared risk to keep in mind.
For sure. And then you've got the legal and tax stuff. That can get really complicated.
Sounds like you really need to know what you're doing.
You do. So lots to consider on both sides. But to see how this really plays out, let's look at an example.
Okay, a real-world example. This is where it gets interesting.
All right. We'll call our investor John and our homeowner facing some tough times, Sarah.
Okay, John and Sarah.
So Sarah, she lost her job and things are getting tight. She owns a nice 3-bedroom, but she's struggling to make those mortgage payments. Foreclosure is looming.
Tough spot. And that's
Yeah.
where John comes in, I'm guessing.
Exactly. John's our savvy investor. He sees potential in Sarah's property. It has an existing mortgage of, let's say, $200,000 at a great interest rate, 3.5% fixed.
Oh, wow. A steal in this market.
Right. So John swoops in with a wraparound mortgage proposal.
Okay, so what do they agree on? What are the terms?
John offers to buy Sarah's house for $220,000. This includes wrapping her existing mortgage and giving her an extra $20,000.
So Sarah gets some financial relief, avoids foreclosure, and gets some cash in hand.
Right. Now, the interest rate on the wraparound. John proposes 6%.
Higher than Sarah's original, but still competitive, probably.
Exactly. That's where John's profit comes in. But he also gave Sarah a $10,000 down payment.
Oh, so she gets some immediate help.
Right away.
Okay, so how do the payments work? This is where I imagine it gets tricky.
It does require some careful planning. John's making monthly payments to Sarah, and she, in turn, keeps paying the bank on her original mortgage.
So John's the middleman.
You got it. And that interest rate difference, the 2.5%, that's Sarah's extra income every month.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So did it work out for them?
It did. For John, it was a success. He got the property without a traditional loan. He locked in that great interest rate, and he found a tenant, actually, rent to own. He was charging $1,800 a month in rent, which was more than his payments to Sarah, building equity and cash flow from day one.
Nice. What about Sarah? Did she manage to escape foreclosure?
She did. The wraparound gave her the breathing room she needed. She got that upfront payment, the monthly income. And when the tenant eventually bought the house, Sarah was in the clear, clean slate.
Sounds like a win-win for both of them.
It was. It shows the potential of wraparound mortgages. But remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. You got to understand the risks.
Right, right. Which is why we're here, to unpack it all. So next, let's look at those steps involved in actually getting a wraparound mortgage. What are the crucial things to consider? Okay, so we've talked about the different kinds of wraparound mortgages, looked at the pros and cons for both sides. But let's say someone's listening and thinking, hey, this wraparound thing, this could actually work for me. What are the actual steps? How do you make this happen? Where do you even start?
Well, the first thing is you got to figure out if a wraparound really fits you. You know, your financial goals, how much risk you're comfortable with. It's not magic, and it's not traditional.
So step one is like being honest with yourself. Does this strategy actually make sense for me?
Exactly. If it does, then the next challenge is finding a seller who's on board with this. It might take some digging.
Because it's not as common as just, a regular sale.
Right. Some sellers might be hesitant. They haven't heard of it, maybe.
So you need to explain it clearly,
Yeah.
educate them a bit.
Exactly. But the right seller, someone who's maybe struggling to sell or likes the idea of that extra income, it can be a win-win.
Okay, so you found a seller who's intrigued. What's next?
Now you got to negotiate. Buyer and seller, they sit down, work out all the details, the interest rate, the down payment, how long the loan is, everything that matters.
It's like a dance.
Yeah.
Trying to find that point where everyone's happy.
Exactly. And here's where you really, really need a good lawyer. Both sides. They need their own attorneys looking over the contract, making sure it's all legal and protects everyone.
Especially those potential legal issues like that due on sale clause. You don't want any surprises.
Nope. Once the terms are set, contract signed, you move on to closing. Paperwork, money changing hands, and the ownership is officially transferred.
It sounds like a lot of moving parts. Any other big things buyers and sellers should think about? Like, even with the best planning, what could still go wrong?
Oh, for sure. There are a few. Underwriting is huge. Just like with a regular mortgage, you have to check the buyer's finances carefully.
So you're not skipping that just because it's a different kind of loan.
Absolutely not. You could argue it's even more important with a wraparound because it's more complicated. An RMLO, a residential mortgage loan originator, can be a big help here.
Good to know. What about laws? Are there specific rules about wraparound mortgages?
Definitely. A few federal laws come into play. You've got the SAFE Act, Dodd-Frank, and ORSPay.
Wow, that's a mouthful. What do they actually do? How do they affect wraparounds?
They're all about protecting consumers, fairness, transparency, that kind of thing. The SAFE Act makes sure anyone arranging these loans is licensed and legit. Dodd-Frank, it's like a big overhaul of the financial system, trying to stop those shady lending practices. And RSPA, it's all about the closing process, making sure borrowers get all the info they need, like loan terms and costs.
So it's not just a handshake deal between two people. There's a whole legal system around it.
Right, and if you don't follow those laws, big trouble. Penalties, lawsuits. That's why you need that real estate attorney. They're crucial.
All right, so the legal stuff is important. But even with all that, even if you do everything right, things can still happen, right?
Unfortunately, yeah. That's where exit strategies come in.
Exit strategies. What does that mean exactly with a wraparound?
Think of it as a plan B. What if the buyer can't make the payments? Or the seller has problems and can't pay the original mortgage? You need to think about those scenarios beforehand.
So you're not just making the deal, you're thinking about what could go wrong down the line.
Exactly. And just as important as all the legal and financial stuff, communication. Clear, honest communication the whole time. Buyer and seller, they got to be on the same page, understand the risks and the rewards.
It's like a partnership. You have to trust each other.
That's it. A wraparound is a partnership. It needs open communication, trust, and that shared understanding of what everyone wants to achieve and what could go wrong.
So wraparound mortgages, they're powerful tools, but you need to use them carefully. Planning, expert advice.
Absolutely. But when they're done right, they can open up amazing opportunities. It's all about weighing the good and bad and making a smart choice for your situation.
Okay, so we've covered the types, the steps, things to watch out for. Before we finish up, any final thoughts on this whole wraparound thing? What's so interesting about it to you?
You know, what fascinates me is that wraparounds, they really shake things up. They challenge how we normally do real estate financing. They create options that just wouldn't exist with traditional loans.
It's like thinking outside the box. Finding solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. And when some people can't get those traditional loans, wraparounds can give them a way to buy a home or invest in property.
It's about having more tools in your toolbox, exploring everything that's out there.
Yep. But not just jumping in blindly.
Right. You have to do your research.
Absolutely. Learn about wraparound mortgages, talk to the experts, the attorneys, the mortgage brokers. They can guide you.
So it's that spark of curiosity, but then taking action, smart action.
Exactly. Wraparounds are powerful, but they need careful thought, a good plan, and knowing both the upsides and the downsides.
Well said. If anyone's listening thinking, maybe this is for me, I'd say reach out to those real estate pros. Get their advice.
Great advice. In real estate, knowledge is power, always. The more you know, the better decisions you can make.
So true. All right, so we've really dug into these wraparound mortgages, seen what they can do, the good and the bad. But before we go, got to leave our listeners with something to think about, something to spark their own curiosity.
Let's go back to John for a sec, our investor. He saw the potential in Sarah's situation, right? Used her low-interest mortgage to make a deal that worked for both of them. So, what if you're John? Could you find something like that in your area? Maybe a homeowner who's in a tough spot or just wants to sell fast. It's all about being aware, looking for those opportunities.
Like a real estate treasure hunt. Never know what you'll find, but of course you don't just jump in head first.
Oh, definitely not. You got to do your homework, research, talk to people, know the market, find those experts, real estate attorneys, mortgage brokers. They can walk you through it.
So curiosity, but then smart action.
Exactly. Wraparound mortgages, they're powerful, but they need careful thought, a plan, knowing what could go right and wrong.
Well said. For anyone listening who's thinking, maybe this wraparound thing is for me, talk to those professionals. Get their advice.
Great advice. In real estate, knowledge is key, always. The more you know, the better decisions you'll make.
Couldn't agree more. And that brings us to the end of our exploration of wraparound mortgages. We've uncovered how they work, what to look out for. Hopefully we've inspired you to explore a little further on your own.
Happy investing, everyone.